2, 1. Welcome to a new edition of Are You Live? We have a guest that a lot of people have been waiting for, very excited about. The famous, the great Deirdre McCloskey. She's joining us not from her amazing loft in downtown Chicago, but from an amazing house in Indiana, I guess. There's a story here. Do you want to tell us the story? Because it's actually quite relevant and important, I think.
Well, I'm down here because my mother was in a retirement community here in Bloomington, Indiana, where my sister teaches at Indiana University. And we couldn't leave Mother in this place because it was going to be locked down, and there was a great danger of the virus. So Mom came over to my sister's house, and she's 90, almost 98, and is for 98, she's in fairly good shape. But I decided to come here from Chicago in order to help with Mom and to help my sister. So the three of us are here. I think I got something like the last bus out of Chicago.
Wow.
Because they closed it down.
Whoa. How old is your mom?
She's almost 98. She'll be 98 at the end of this month. In June.
So this is someone who definitely needs to be protected.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, so do I. I was born in 1942. You can do the math.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And,
yeah. So tell us, what is your take on all of this? Tell us what is your take on the politics of pandemic so far?
Well, two things. As a liberal, and I think that's a word we ought to take back, we so-called American libertarians. I'm a classical liberal, but I'm going to drop the classical. I'm a liberal. I believe in a society of free adults. And I don't believe that we should make people into children or into slaves. Women shouldn't be subordinated to their husbands, and citizens shouldn't be subordinated to bureaucrats and so forth. But there are exceptions. An invasion by a foreign power. Now, my own special fear, I can hardly sleep at night because of it, is Canada. I believe that the Canadians are going to invade and take over Maine, and
me too.
And they're very dangerous.
They are.
So if they start doing that, then there's a case for the government to coerce the younger people here into an army. Oof. I wouldn't be of much use in such an army. Likewise, for a forest fire, right? Mm-hmm. A really big forest fire like the ones they were having in California last season. Again, it needs a central power of some sort, in that case, just the state of California. Now, for this virus, I think what should have happened, and did happen in some countries, is that the government jumps on it fast, coerces people a little bit, and then test. You do it right. We've known how to do this with epidemics for about 100 years. And we didn't have to do, whereas if you screw that up, as the United States did and Britain did, France, Spain, and Italy, not too good either. If you screw it up, then you have to do this mass quarantine stuff, which is a problem. So amazingly, Greece did it very well. New Zealand did it very well. Australia did it very well. And of course, famously, South Korea did. So that's the exception. Mm-hmm. Now, the danger is in the long run.
Right.
And it can go either way. It can either be a great triumph for a coercive state, which is the Chinese case, you might say. Now, the Chinese caused it, but okay, let's set that aside. But because they had these coercive powers and used them in this very violent way, they were able to stop it. Vietnam is the same way, although they did it in a better way than the Chinese did. So anyway, authoritarianism can work, but as I just said, so can democracy. So you might draw the conclusion that a small, competent government can do the job, and then you would draw the long-term inference that that's the way to go. And I'm hoping that that's what comes out of it. I'm afraid it won't, but I hope it does.
Mm-hmm.
If I can sharpen the point with one further comment. If Donald Trump goes on being Donald Trump, goes on with his problems, and doesn't do a good job in the next 5 months, he's going to lose the election in November. And from my point of view, I'll concede, I think that would be wonderful. But so far as this deeper question of what the political and economic future of the world is and of the United States, if he loses the election, right-wing populism will suffer a blow worldwide. Now, left-wing populism is another matter, but the Bolsonaros of the world will have the wind taken out of their sails if he falls.
We have a good question from in the chat for you, I think, from James and Andrew, which is this: when's the last time a small, competent government stayed small and competent?
That's a good point.
That's a question for you.
I know it is, and they stayed small and competent in the 19th century, and then ideology changed. There's a very good book to be written, which hasn't been, about how this happened in various countries. I'm not competent to do it, but there was a change that for example, in Germany, in Prussia, and then the German Empire, Bismarck explicitly wanted to take the strength out of the left by introducing old age pensions in the German Empire, which he did in 1889. In 1911, state unemployment insurance came into Britain. And we know about the 1930s in the United States. So there was this slow drift towards statism. I myself am a beneficiary of this. I'm on Medicare. All you young people, thank you very much, are paying for me. If you're a veteran, go to the VA hospital. That's socialized medicine. So there's been this drift, this ideological drift, to the point where the word liberal in the United States, as you know, means sweet social democrat. It doesn't mean what it once meant.
Right.
So that, it's kind of a rambling answer, but you can see I don't know why it changed, but it did.
Well, I'm thinking of also states in response to, real or perceived crises like war or pandemic. So, I mean, I can't think of an example of a nation state reducing its power following a national crisis, right?
I make the claim, I would make the claim, I've only been thinking about this during this crisis, but it seems to me that, I have a friend who you perhaps know of, Robert Higgs, the great historian and economist, and Bob wrote a book a long time ago about the ratchet effect of government spending. It's only in the 20th century that you get the ratchet, and there were wars before. There were, Chicago was having cholera epidemics, fairly serious ones, every 5 years. in the 19th century
Hmm.
until they reversed the flow of the Chicago River.
Hmm.
So countries, cities, states have been dealing with wars and forest fires and other things like this for a long time, and it didn't result in this automatic increase. Now in France, 57% of national income is spent by the government. 57%. In the United States, it's about 34, 35%, something like that.
Wow.
Whereas all these countries in 1900, 1910, it's about 10%.
Uh-huh.
And then, of course, as Will Rogers, the great Oklahoma humorist, said, just be glad you don't get the government you paid for. What's happened in the 20th century especially is that the government has enormously expanded its regulatory power.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The Food and Drug Administration regulates 1/5 of the American economy.
Wow. I didn't know that.
You know,
So,
it's pretty big. It's pretty big, and it's getting bigger. And all I can think of to stop it, there isn't any trick here. There's no, you know, I can't think of any switch to turn, is to argue for a return to liberal values.
mm-hmm.
This idea that no one should be a slave, no one should be a child.
So you talked about the rise of state power in Europe and the United States from between the 19th and 20th centuries. And I'm thinking, of course, you're right about that. I'm thinking about the cause of that. And I got to think that I'm a Hegelian, you know, so I think like ideas make the world. So I got to think that the rise of nationalism as an idea is really what kind of was the engine that drove that.
That's an excellent point. There's an extremely good book by Jeffrey Tucker about this. And Jeffrey argues precisely that it's Hegel for nationalism and Hegel for socialism.
Mm-hmm.
Hegel inverted in the case of Marx,
right?
But Hegel.
Yeah.
And my line on this is that in the last couple of centuries, the intelligentsia, that's us guys, these people here, have had three big political ideas. Liberalism was the first one in the 18th century. Then nationalism in the early 19th century, and socialism in the second half of the 19th century. Now, I think that only one of these ideas is any good. And that's liberalism. Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, Mary
Wollstonecraft,
Tom Paine, these are my heroes. And the other two are terrible ideas. You like nationalism and you like socialism. Maybe you'll like National Socialism.
There you go. I agree with you. Socialism, it's making a bit of a comeback now, but I gotta say nationalism, it's a tough call, but I think it's the root of more evil than socialism even.
But think of the combination.
Oh yeah, no, it's really, it's a fantastic combination. It's like peanut butter and chocolate when you get nationalism and socialism. Yeah. Oh yeah, everybody loves that. Nothing like National Socialism. All right, Joe, you go for it. You're up.
Hey, thanks for coming. Thanks for talking to us. The economic impact got me thinking once again, because it always comes up, but why don't deficits and debt ever seem to matter? I know that Paul Krugman and probably other economists as well make the argument that, well, in the end it doesn't, because we just owe it to ourselves, right? So we can always tax future generations.
Yeah, that's
and I follow Cafe Hayek, and Don Boudreaux always does a great job of responding to that claim. But it just doesn't seem to, I mean, it doesn't seem to impact the stock market, the level of productivity, the art. I mean, we have one of the greatest tech industries in the world. I mean, there's so much about our economy that is profound, but it just doesn't seem to matter.
Well, it's true. Look,
great question.
What is true, and I completely agree with Don Bourgeois, who is a student of the great James Buchanan, who made the point that to say it doesn't matter because we pay it to ourselves is like saying that when you're held up with a gun in the park, that's okay because after all, the robber gets your money. So hey, it's a wash, right? And that was Jim Buchanan's point, that taxes to pay the debt or even to service the debt, to pay the interest on it, are compelled. I don't think there's anyone here who, if there's no shame about it, would voluntarily pay taxes. I sure as heck wouldn't. And whereas the bond purchase is voluntary, but the other side is not. But the problem is, as a historian, I know that the ratio of debt to national income can be very high without much happening. This is sovereign debt, after all. It's not you and me. If we owed $23 trillion, we would be in real deep doo-doo. There's no doubt about that. But if the full faith and credit of the British government or the American government or whatever, or the Japanese government or Chinese is behind the debt, then you can get very high ratios without much trouble. Look, at the end of the Second World War, the funded debt, that is the bonds, relative to American national income was 2. That is, the debt was twice national income. Same was true in 1815 after the Napoleonic War for the British. And they, by the way, paid off national debt in the next 40 years. So that's why it doesn't matter, because these entities called governments can print money and they can tax us. They can tax us to pay it off. So everyone believes it is going to be paid off.
So as a follow-up, what would cause them to matter? Like, what would be an example of an event where politicians would be motivated to do something about it?
When it gets up to 3 or 4, like in Greece. That's what happened to Greece. That's what happened to Peru over its history. The Peruvians, not modern, but in the 19th century and early 20th, were just famous for not paying their government debt. So they would just walk away from it. So they ended up paying 30% interest rate, like from the mob or something, because no one would believe they would pay off.
Huh.
But everyone believes that the United States is going to pay its debts.
I'm still not sure what the answer is here, though. Like, because I've had the same question for decades. I've asked people, so what if we default? Like, what's the problem? We're still the superpower. Like, what?
You should default. Actually, by the way, that's why you shouldn't be afraid of Chinese foreign investment. There was all this hysteria in the 1980s about Japanese foreign investment. And these, there was a lot of racism in this. Or racism about East Asians. And people, the Japanese, if it was Dutch people investing, they wouldn't have cared at all. But it was these I won't use ethnic slurs, but people were using them then. Yep. And what happened is that the Japanese bought Rockefeller Plaza and sent the United States Toyotas and TVs, and we sent them green pieces of paper with portraits of American presidents on them, which cost about 2 or 3 cents a copy to make.
Hmm.
And we sent them a tiny bit of soybeans as well. That was it. That was the deal. And at the time, I said, "This is a great deal. We got to keep doing this to the Japanese." And the Chinese are doing exactly the same thing.
Hmm.
They're making investments in Africa. They bought the port of Piraeus in Greece, the port of Athens. They're buying it. They're going to do the Belt and Road Initiative, this completely loony project to build a railway across Central Asia, blah, 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 blah. Well, now look, the moment that some African government doesn't like what the Chinese are doing, it can take the asset and say, "So sorry, we're not going to pay for this anymore. We're going to take it over." If the Greek government wants to take back the port of Piraeus after the Chinese have spent $1 trillion improving it, the Chinese can do nothing about it. This isn't the 19th century. There's not this enormous asymmetry of military power anymore, where you could send a gunboat up the Yangtze and shoot at the Chinese if they didn't pay. You can't do that anymore. So I'm completely not worried about this racist talk about, "Oh, the Chinese are coming. Oh, be careful. Oh, this lunatic in the White House, Miller." Actually, he's not the worst on this point. The worst is Navarro, Peter Navarro.
Yeah, on China, Navarro. I'm glad to hear that fairly sanguine attitude about China. We've talked about China a lot on here, and I'm still not sure what they're up to. I mean, you're right. That's a very interesting point about the Belt and Road Initiative and how any nation state along the way there can cut it off.
That's right. They say, "No, sorry, you're going to have to pay a little tariff."
They can. I mean, there's this guy in Egypt named Nasser knew a little something about that. Taught us something about that in 1956, right? He said, "This is my canal now."
Sorry, this is my canal now.
That's right. This is my canal now. Jason, what do you want to ask Deirdre?
Where's Jason?
He's coming.
Hello, Deirdre.
Hi, how are you?
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Hey.
So, Deirdre, I need your help. I need an intervention here.
Okay.
You said in your appearance on Thad's podcast on Registered, you said that capitalism is a compressed term, meaning that they fit so many things in it, and it seems often that anything that's malignant in the world, they'll say it's capitalism. I see that a lot. Now, I go through a lot of ideological fluctuations like every 3 or 4 years.
I did too.
That's a good thing. If you're changing your mind often, it means that you're open. And I try to consume different books from different ideologies.
Do it.
I find myself now in sort of not fully, but I find myself in sort of a little left tilt.
Yeah.
And because I like the idea on its face of, for instance, free trade, right? Yeah. Because I think inevitably it's going to lead to first choice. Yeah, it's going to lead to innovation. The thing that I'm worried about is, and of course we see this in the world, I'm worried about, there are some people critics who say, well, you really can't have a free market. What I'm concerned about is powerful people with resources ascending and just rigging things to their benefit.
Well, I understand, dear. And look, I want to get rid of the word free trade. It's not effective rhetorically. What we should call it is voluntary trade. Or voluntary exchange or something, or even just voluntary trade. Because the key claim that economists should be saying to people is you should be allowed to buy what and where you want. The rest of the society shouldn't have an opinion. If I decide to buy a hideous burnt orange dress. The older women here will know about burnt orange. That you know, I should be allowed to do that, and I should be allowed to buy it wherever I want. If I want to buy it from a person in Italy, I should be allowed to do that. As far as the drift to the left, don't worry about it. I was once I call myself a Marxist. I was kind of unscholarly Marxist when I was 16. But my position is that I call myself a Christian liberal. By that I mean that you don't have to believe in God or be a Christian. I'm an Episcopalian, so don't get worried. I'm harmless. But all I mean is that we have an obligation to each other. I was thinking the other day of a phrase that might capture it. Liberated people in community. And the in community part's important. We have families, we have towns, we have countries, we have the world, and we should care about each other. So a hand up to the poor people, give people permission. That's I think a much better word than equality of opportunity. Permission. So I see a world in which we're all treating each other with respect, and that we care about each other, that we love each other. Again, I highly recommend Jeffrey Tucker, who's written a very good book called "The Market Loves You and You Should Love It Back," or something like that. Tucker.
Wait, oh, okay. I got to break in here because you're talking about love now. Makes me upset.
It makes the men all upset. They get all.
Don't stop gendering me.
I don't have to gender you, dear, that you're worried about the word love.
How dare you gender me?
That you're a dude.
So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people here know where I'm going here. Deirdre, come on. Universal love? Like, wait a minute. Like,
Yeah.
How is that different than, well, it's not. I mean, it's the Christian love, right? And then that, gets very sticky and dangerous, doesn't it? Because you start to make claims on behalf of other people all the way across the world.
No, that's not love. That's domination. That's,
well, all right.
That's making people into children.
What's the line between good love and imperialist love? How about that?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Okay, cool. Okay.
Makes sense. I mean, the Dutch had their empire in Indonesia, and they earnestly claimed that they loved the Indonesians.
Right.
And then they said, well, dears, you've got to stay. They were saying this in the early 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
You have to stay in subordination to the Dutch nation for another 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll be old enough to take care of yourself.
Right.
Now that's not love. You could say it's love, but it's love without adult respect for the other person.
Okay.
So I think it sounds strange, but I think nations should love each other.
Ooh.
And that we should look. Here's one way to put it. This realism in international relations that Nixon and my father's colleague Henry Kissinger and so forth, they advocated, and that a lot of tough guy men, well, we're going to just do self-interest here. Trump has a particularly juvenile version of it. That's not sensible. We should care about the Chinese and the Australians and the Indians and the Russians, and we should love them. And that doesn't mean we have to abandon our interests, but it means we have to respect them.
All right, I have the ultimate question for
What's
you,
that?
but I'm going to
What's
ask it.
the
I'm going to
life?
ask it when we go to the. I'm going to ask it when we go to the private session after this. So if you're watching on YouTube and you want to join RU Live sessions in the future, go to renegadeuniversity.com and become a member at any level, or click the link below. And now we're going to go to the private session, and I'll ask Deirdre the big question.